Sometimes, the people who carry the greatest dignity are the ones the world mistakes for being powerless. The first rays of morning sunlight stretched across the quiet streets of Richmond, Virginia, painting the sidewalks in soft shades of gold as the city slowly awakened. Delivery trucks rolled past sleepy storefronts, coffee shops unlocked their doors, and office workers hurried toward another ordinary weekday. To everyone watching, it looked like a morning destined to disappear into memory before the day was over. But for one 68-year-old man, it would become the day that changed countless lives. Nathaniel Brooks stepped carefully from his aging blue sedan, smoothing the wrinkles from the sleeves of his neatly pressed brown jacket before reaching into the passenger seat. Resting there was a small gift box wrapped in dark blue paper with a silver ribbon tied carefully around it. He lifted it with both hands, almost as though it contained something fragile beyond measure. In truth, it wasn't expensive. Inside rested a worn family photograph, an old military challenge coin that had belonged to Nathaniel's late father, and a handwritten card with only 4 simple words written across the front, "For my son." Nathaniel smiled quietly to himself. "I hope he likes it," he whispered beneath his breath. He checked the time on his old wristwatch. His son had promised to meet him near the federal courthouse after finishing an early meeting. They hadn't seen each other in nearly 6 months. Life had a way of keeping families apart, even the closest ones. Nathaniel understood that better than anyone. He had spent 35 years teaching history in Richmond public schools, encouraging generations of students to believe that patience often accomplished what anger never could. Thousands of young people had passed through his classroom. Doctors, lawyers, nurses, soldiers, business owners. Some still recognized him on the street, stopping only long enough to say thank you before continuing with their busy lives. Nathaniel never expected recognition. He simply appreciated knowing that kindness had a way of traveling farther than anyone could measure. He tucked the gift beneath one arm and began walking toward a small coffee shop across from the courthouse. The air carried the scent of fresh bread and roasted coffee beans. A young couple laughed as they hurried inside. A mother held her little daughter's hand while waiting for the pedestrian light to change. Construction workers joked with one another across the street. It was the kind of peaceful morning that reminded Nathaniel why he still loved this city despite everything it had witnessed over the years. Before reaching the entrance, he noticed an elderly veteran struggling to lift a folded walker over the curb. Without hesitation, Nathaniel set the gift box on a nearby bench and walked over. "Allow me," he said warmly. Together they lifted the walker onto the sidewalk. "Much appreciated," the veteran replied with a grateful smile. Nathaniel simply nodded. "We've all needed a little help at some point." He returned to retrieve the gift box, carefully brushing away a few tiny leaves that had fallen across the ribbon. His eyes drifted once more toward the courthouse rising proudly above the surrounding buildings. Somewhere inside, his son was finishing work. Nathaniel felt the familiar warmth of anticipation settle into his chest. He imagined the smile on his son's face when he handed over the small package. It wasn't the gift that mattered. It was the reminder that family remained life's greatest blessing, no matter how much time passed between visits. Unaware that several pairs of eyes had already begun watching him from across the street, Nathaniel adjusted his jacket and continued walking. Parked near the courthouse entrance sat a marked patrol vehicle. Leaning casually against its front fender, Officer Ryan Mercer observed the elderly man with growing suspicion. Nathaniel never noticed him. He simply glanced once more at his watch, smiled to himself, and quietly whispered, "I hope he isn't late." Officer Ryan Mercer had learned to trust his instincts long before he learned to question them. Standing beside his patrol vehicle with one hand resting on his duty belt, he watched Nathaniel Brooks from across the street. The elderly black man carried a neatly wrapped gift box, walked with quiet confidence, and smiled politely at strangers who passed by. To most people, there was nothing unusual about him. To Ryan, there was something that simply didn't feel right. Experience, he often claimed, taught officers to notice details other people ignored. The truth was far less noble. Too often, his instincts were little more than assumptions wearing the disguise of experience. As Nathaniel reached the entrance of the coffee shop, Ryan pushed himself away from the cruiser and crossed the street. His boots struck the pavement with slow, deliberate authority. Several pedestrians glanced toward the uniform before quickly looking away. Nathaniel had just reached for the door when Ryan's voice stopped him. "Hold it." Nathaniel turned with a gentle smile. "Good morning, officer." Ryan ignored the greeting. His eyes settled on the blue gift box tucked beneath Nathaniel's arm. "What's in the box?" Nathaniel looked down briefly before answering. "A gift for my son." "Open it." Nathaniel blinked. "Excuse me." Ryan stepped closer until only a few feet separated them. "I said open it." The warmth that had filled the morning seemed to disappear. People entering the coffee shop slowed without realizing it. A young woman carrying 2 cups of coffee paused beside the window. A delivery driver stopped unloading crates from his truck. Nathaniel remained calm. "Officer, is there a reason you're asking?" Ryan folded his arms. "You asking questions now?" Nathaniel spoke carefully, choosing each word as though he had spent a lifetime understanding how quickly conversations could become confrontations. "I'm simply trying to understand." Ryan's jaw tightened. "You understand when I tell you to." Without waiting for permission, he reached toward the gift box. Nathaniel instinctively held it a little closer to his chest. The movement lasted less than a second. Ryan interpreted it as resistance. "See," he muttered loudly enough for nearby people to hear. "Now you're hiding something." Nathaniel slowly released one hand from the package. "I'm hiding nothing. It's only a present for my son." Ryan laughed under his breath. "Sure it is." Phones quietly appeared in people's hands. No one said anything. Yet more eyes turned toward the unfolding encounter. Nathaniel noticed them. He also noticed the fear on a little boy's face as he watched from inside the coffee shop beside his mother. Nathaniel offered the child a reassuring smile before looking back at Ryan. "My son is expecting me." Ryan shook his head. "Looks like he'll be waiting a little longer." Nathaniel glanced at his watch one more time. His voice remained remarkably steady. "I promised I'd be here before he arrived." Ryan took one more step forward, his expression growing colder with every passing second. "Then maybe," he said, reaching toward the gift box again, "you should have thought about that before making yourself look suspicious." Nathaniel never moved. He simply tightened his grip on the small blue package, unaware that within the next few moments, one impulsive act would be captured by dozens of cameras, and would forever change the careers of everyone standing on that sidewalk. Ryan Mercer grabbed the blue gift box before Nathaniel could react. The silver ribbon slipped loose as the package tilted sideways in the officer's hand. "Let's see what you're trying so hard to protect," Ryan said coldly. Nathaniel's expression tightened, not with anger, but with quiet concern. "Please," he said. "It's a gift. I'd appreciate it if you handled it carefully." Ryan ignored him. He lifted the lid just enough to look inside. A faded family photograph rested beside an old military challenge coin and a handwritten card. There were no weapons. No drugs. No stolen property. Nothing remotely suspicious. For a brief moment, Ryan realized he had been wrong. But pride has a dangerous way of refusing to admit what truth has already proven. He snapped the lid shut and looked around, suddenly aware that dozens of people had paused to watch. Several phones were pointed directly at him. Instead of stepping back, he doubled down. "You think this makes you innocent?" he asked loudly. Nathaniel answered with the same calm voice he had used from the beginning. "Officer, I've done nothing wrong." Ryan took another step closer. "You're arguing with me." "No, sir. You're refusing to cooperate." Nathaniel slowly shook his head. I've answered every question. The crowd grew noticeably quieter. Even passing traffic seemed to fade beneath the tension building outside the coffee shop. A teenage boy whispered, "He's not doing anything." His mother gently touched his shoulder, silently urging him to stay out of it. Nathaniel looked once toward the courthouse across the street. He checked his watch again. His son would be arriving soon. He hoped the meeting wouldn't begin with unnecessary trouble. Ryan mistook the glance toward the courthouse for distraction. "Look at me when I'm talking to you." Nathaniel immediately met his eyes. "I'm listening." Ryan's frustration boiled over. Without warning, he shoved the gift box against Nathaniel's chest. The elderly man stumbled backward one step, barely keeping his balance. The box slipped from his hands and struck the sidewalk. The photograph slid across the concrete. The old challenge coin rolled several feet before stopping beside the curb. Nathaniel instinctively bent to retrieve them. Ryan reached out, grabbed his arm, and pulled him upright. "Don't move." "Officer," Nathaniel said quietly, "those belong to my father." Ryan's response came faster than reason. His open hand struck Nathaniel across the face with a sharp crack that echoed through the sidewalk. Gasps erupted from every direction. Someone screamed, "Did he just hit that old man?" More phones rose into the air. Camera lenses captured every second. Nathaniel never raised a hand in return. He slowly turned his head back toward Ryan, one hand resting gently against his cheek. There was sadness in his eyes, but no hatred. Only disappointment. Then, instead of defending himself, he crouched carefully and picked up the weathered family photograph. He brushed away the dust with remarkable tenderness before placing it back inside the box. Looking down at the picture for just a moment, he whispered softly enough that only those nearest could hear, "I promised my son today would be a happy day." None of them realized that less than a minute from now, black government SUVs would turn onto the street, and everything Officer Ryan Mercer believed about power was about to change forever. The sound reached the intersection before anyone saw the vehicles. Low engines. Smooth acceleration. 3 black SUVs turned the corner one after another, moving without flashing lights or sirens. They rolled to a controlled stop along the curb beside the federal courthouse, their tinted windows reflecting the growing crowd gathered around Nathaniel Brooks. Officer Ryan Mercer barely glanced in their direction. His attention remained fixed on the elderly man standing quietly in front of him, one hand still resting on the blue gift box. Around them, dozens of cell phones continued recording. The silence felt heavier than the slap itself. Nathaniel carefully placed the faded photograph back inside the box before lifting his eyes toward the approaching vehicles. A faint smile appeared despite the redness spreading across his cheek. "Right on time," he whispered. The rear door of the lead SUV opened. A tall man stepped onto the sidewalk wearing a dark navy suit, polished black shoes, and a simple blue tie. There was nothing flashy about him. No dramatic entrance. No raised voice. He carried a leather briefcase in one hand and walked with calm, measured confidence. His eyes immediately found Nathaniel. The smile disappeared from his face. For a brief second, he stopped walking altogether. His gaze settled on the faint handprint forming across his father's cheek. Then he noticed the crushed gift box. The scattered ribbon. The crowd. The phones recording every movement. Finally, his eyes rested on Officer Ryan Mercer. Ryan frowned. "Sir, this area is restricted. Keep moving." The man continued forward without changing pace. He never looked away from Nathaniel. When he reached him, he bent down, picked up the loose silver ribbon from the sidewalk, and gently placed it back inside the gift box. Only then did he speak. His voice was quiet, steady, and filled with concern. "Dad, are you hurt?" Nathaniel offered the same reassuring smile he had given the frightened little boy moments earlier. "I'll be all right." The crowd exchanged confused glances. Dad?" Ryan looked from the elderly man to the stranger in the suit. The resemblance suddenly became impossible to ignore. Before Ryan could speak again, two more men in dark suits stepped out of the remaining SUVs. They positioned themselves several feet behind the first man but said nothing. Their eyes calmly observed the entire scene. The man straightened his jacket before turning toward Ryan for the very first time. "Officer," he said politely, "I'm Special Agent Daniel Brooks." He reached inside his suit jacket and removed a black leather credential wallet. Ryan barely looked at it. "I don't care who you say you are." Daniel calmly opened the credential. The gold badge reflected the morning sunlight. Beneath it rested official federal identification bearing his photograph and the unmistakable seal of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Several people in the crowd gasped. Ryan's expression hardened rather than softened. "Anyone can carry a badge," he replied. Daniel closed the credential without the slightest sign of irritation. "That's true," he answered evenly. Fortunately, authenticity is very easy to verify. One of the suited agents quietly lifted a phone to his ear. Across the street, courthouse security officers had already begun walking toward the gathering. Ryan suddenly realized the morning was no longer under his control. And he still had no idea that this unexpected reunion between a father and his son was only the beginning of a far larger story, one that had been unfolding long before he ever laid a hand on Nathaniel Brooks. Ryan Mercer stared at the leather credential for only a fraction of a second before handing it back with a dismissive shrug. "I've seen fake badges before," he said. "A piece of leather doesn't impress me." The words hung in the air, drawing uneasy glances from courthouse security officers who had just arrived at the edge of the gathering. Daniel Brooks slipped the credential back inside his jacket without the slightest change in expression. "That's your decision, officer." His voice remained calm, almost unusually calm considering what had just happened to his father. Nathaniel placed a gentle hand on Daniel's forearm. "I'm all right," he said quietly. "Don't let this become something bigger." "Then it already is." Daniel looked at the faint redness on Nathaniel's cheek and gave a small nod. "I'm here because of you, Dad." Then he turned back toward Ryan. "But I'm also here because I have official business inside that courthouse." Ryan folded his arms. "You're not going anywhere until I figure out what's happening." One of the suited agents behind Daniel spoke for the first time. "Special Agent Brooks has a scheduled federal meeting at 9 o'clock. Ryan didn't even look at him. "Then he'll be late." The crowd reacted with murmurs. More people had gathered on the sidewalk, and nearly every phone remained pointed toward the confrontation. Several courthouse employees whispered among themselves after recognizing the FBI seal on Daniel's credentials. Nathaniel noticed the attention and sighed softly. He had spent decades teaching young people that pride often turns small mistakes into lasting regrets. Standing between his son and the officer, he feared he was watching that lesson unfold in real time. Daniel reached into his briefcase and removed a sealed envelope bearing the Department of Justice letterhead. He handed it to a courthouse administrator who had just hurried outside after hearing the commotion. The administrator's eyes widened as he scanned the first page. He immediately looked back at Daniel. "Sir, we've been expecting you." Ryan's confidence faltered for the first time. "Expecting him?" The administrator nodded. "Judge Evelyn Carter requested his arrival personally." Ryan looked from the administrator to Daniel and then back to Nathaniel. None of it made sense anymore. He had assumed he was dealing with an ordinary citizen and an overconfident man claiming to be federal law enforcement. Instead, every passing second suggested the situation was becoming far more serious than he had imagined. Daniel accepted the envelope back without saying another word. "Officer Mercer," he said evenly, "my father isn't the reason I came to this courthouse today." Ryan frowned. "Then why are you here?" Daniel paused for just a moment. It wasn't hesitation. It was restraint. "Because for the past 7 months," he answered quietly, "I've been assigned to Assist a federal investigation involving repeated civil rights complaints against multiple officers working in this district. The color slowly drained from Ryan's face. Before he could form another question, a black SUV door opened once more. A middle-aged woman in a dark business suit stepped onto the sidewalk carrying a thick evidence binder beneath one arm. She looked directly at Daniel before shifting her attention to Ryan. "Officer Mercer," she said calmly, "I believe it's time we discussed why today's incident was never supposed to become your first encounter with this investigation." The crowd fell completely silent as the woman carrying the evidence binder walked toward Officer Ryan Mercer. She introduced herself with the calm confidence of someone who never needed to raise her voice to command attention. "My name is Assistant United States Attorney Rebecca Collins," she said. "I've been coordinating with the Civil Rights Division on an ongoing federal review." Ryan swallowed but forced himself to maintain a firm posture. "This is still my scene." Rebecca looked briefly toward Nathaniel Brooks before returning her attention to Ryan. "Not anymore." She opened the thick binder in her hands. Colored tabs divided hundreds of pages into carefully organized sections. Every document had been labeled, dated, and indexed. "Officer Mercer," she continued, "over the past 7 months, our office has received multiple citizen complaints involving unnecessary detentions, excessive force allegations, and accusations of discriminatory policing connected to several officers assigned to this district." Ryan immediately interrupted. "Allegations don't prove anything." Daniel Brooks nodded slightly. "You're right. Allegations alone never do." He paused before adding, "Evidence does." Rebecca removed the first photograph from the binder. It showed Ryan during a traffic stop several months earlier. Another photograph followed. Then another. Body camera still frames. Security camera images. Complaint summaries. Witness statements. None of them alone established a pattern. Together, they painted a picture that was impossible to ignore. Ryan stared at the growing stack with visible disbelief. "You've been building a case against me?" Daniel answered carefully. "Not against you. Against misconduct, wherever the evidence led." Nathaniel listened quietly from only a few feet away. He had no interest in watching anyone's life fall apart. His heart remained fixed on something far more important. Whether this painful morning might still become the beginning of someone's change rather than the end of someone's future. Rebecca turned another page. Today's incident was not planned. She glanced toward the dozens of people still recording with their phones. But it became the strongest piece of evidence collected so far because every important angle was independently documented. A courthouse security supervisor stepped forward carrying a tablet. "We've already preserved footage from 6 exterior courthouse cameras," he reported. "Local businesses have also agreed to provide surveillance recordings." Ryan looked around for the first time since the confrontation had begun. Every face staring back at him reflected disappointment rather than anger. No one was celebrating. No one appeared satisfied. They simply looked saddened by what they had witnessed. Daniel slowly walked toward his father and picked up the blue gift box from the nearby bench. He carefully straightened the bent corner before placing the silver ribbon back around it as neatly as he could. Nathaniel smiled faintly. "You always were patient with details." Daniel returned the smile. "I learned that from you." The brief exchange stood in sharp contrast to the tension surrounding them. It reminded everyone watching that the story unfolding before their eyes was never simply about an investigation. It was about character. Rebecca closed the binder. "Officer Mercer," she said quietly, effective immediately, "your supervisor has been notified, Internal Affairs has been contacted, and you are instructed to remain available for administrative review." Before Ryan could answer, the sound of another patrol vehicle approaching echoed through the street. This time, it wasn't arriving to support him. It was arriving to relieve him of the authority he had believed no one could ever question. Officer Ryan Mercer had always believed the badge on his chest represented certainty. Now, for the first time in his career, it felt unexpectedly heavy. The second patrol vehicle stopped beside the curb, and a lieutenant stepped out with two internal affairs investigators following closely behind. They did not rush. They did not argue. They simply walked toward Ryan with the quiet professionalism that accompanies difficult decisions. Lieutenant Michael Harris removed his patrol cap before speaking. "Ryan," he said evenly, "I need your duty weapon." The request landed harder than any accusation. Ryan stared at him, unable to respond. "Lieutenant, you can't be serious." Harris held his gaze. "I'm following procedure." A long silence settled between them before Ryan slowly unclipped his holster and handed over the firearm. Next came his spare magazine. Then his department-issued identification. Finally, after several painful seconds, his badge. Harris accepted each item carefully without embarrassment or anger. "You'll remain on administrative leave pending the outcome of the investigation." Around them, the crowd remained unusually quiet. No one applauded. No one celebrated. Many lowered their phones altogether. What had begun as a public confrontation no longer felt like entertainment. It felt like witnessing the collapse of a man's certainty. Ryan looked toward Nathaniel Brooks for the first time without suspicion clouding his expression. The elderly man stood beside his son, holding the slightly damaged blue gift box against his chest. Despite everything that had happened, there was no satisfaction in Nathaniel's face. Only sadness. Daniel noticed Ryan's expression and quietly stepped back, allowing the moment to belong to the two men whose lives had unexpectedly collided that morning. Ryan took a hesitant step forward. "Mr. Brooks." His voice faltered. Nathaniel waited patiently. Ryan stopped again, struggling to find words that had never come easily. Nathaniel rescued him from the silence. "You don't owe me an explanation today." Ryan slowly shook his head. "Maybe not." He looked briefly at the ground before continuing. "But I owe you the truth." Nathaniel remained still. Ryan inhaled deeply. "When I saw you this morning, I decided who you were before I ever spoke to you." The admission carried more weight than any formal report ever could. "I convinced myself my assumptions were experience." He looked directly into Nathaniel's eyes. "They weren't." Nathaniel nodded gently. "Recognizing that is where change begins." Daniel watched his father with quiet admiration. He had spent years investigating misconduct, collecting evidence, and presenting facts in courtrooms. Yet he knew no federal investigation possessed the power of simple human dignity freely offered in a moment when anger would have been easier. Lieutenant Harris approached Daniel. "We'll handle everything from here." Daniel gave a respectful nod. "That's all we've ever asked." Nathaniel adjusted the ribbon around the small gift box before smiling faintly at his son. "You know," he said, "I almost forgot why I came downtown today." Daniel laughed softly for the first time all morning. "I think I know someone who was expecting a birthday gift." Nathaniel handed him the blue package. "Then let's not keep him waiting any longer." As father and son stood together beneath the courthouse steps, Ryan watched in silence, realizing that the greatest lesson of his career had not come from a supervisor, a courtroom, or an investigation. It had come from the quiet grace of the very man he had failed to see with fairness only an hour earlier. By early afternoon, the crowd had long since disappeared, but the weight of the morning refused to leave anyone who had witnessed it. Inside a quiet conference room overlooking the federal courthouse plaza, Nathaniel Brooks and his son finally found a few uninterrupted moments together. The blue gift box rested on the polished wooden table between them. Its corner remained slightly bent, a silent reminder that even cherished things sometimes carry the marks of difficult days. Daniel untied the silver ribbon with careful hands. "You always wrap gifts the same way," he said with a faint smile. Nathaniel chuckled softly. "Some habits are worth keeping." Inside, Daniel found the faded family photograph. It showed a much younger Nathaniel standing beside his late father, both smiling beneath the shade of an old oak tree. Beneath it lay the weathered military challenge coin and the handwritten card. Daniel opened the card slowly. Four simple words greeted him once again. For my son. He looked up, his eyes noticeably brighter than before. You didn't have to do this. Nathaniel smiled. A father never stops wanting his son to remember where he came from. For a few quiet moments, neither of them spoke. Outside the window, courthouse employees continued with their ordinary routines, unaware that one family inside had just survived an extraordinary morning without allowing bitterness to take root. Daniel finally broke the silence. Dad, after everything that happened today, are you angry? Nathaniel leaned back in his chair before answering. I was disappointed. He paused thoughtfully. Anger burns too much energy. I'd rather spend mine building something better. Daniel lowered his eyes toward the photograph again. During years with the Bureau, he had interviewed victims whose pain often turned into lifelong resentment. His father had somehow chosen a different path. I don't know if I could have handled it the way you did, he admitted. Nathaniel reached across the table and gently placed a hand over Daniel's. You already did. Daniel looked confused. Nathaniel continued. You could have humiliated that officer in front of everyone. You had the authority. You had the evidence. Instead, you let the process speak louder than your emotions. Daniel smiled quietly. You taught me that. Across town, Officer Ryan Mercer sat alone inside an administrative office, waiting for investigators to begin formal interviews. His uniform shirt felt unfamiliar without the badge pinned above the pocket. Every few minutes, his mind returned to the image of Nathaniel carefully brushing dust from an old family photograph after being struck across the face. More than the investigation, more than the cameras, that simple act refused to leave him. He finally understood why. It revealed a kind of strength he had never learned inside a police academy. Back at the courthouse, Daniel carefully returned every item to the gift box before closing the lid. I'll keep this forever, he said. Nathaniel stood and adjusted his jacket. Good. Together they walked toward the courthouse exit. As the afternoon sun settled over the city, father and son stepped outside side by side. Neither spoke for several moments. They didn't need to. Some victories require no celebration because the greatest triumph isn't watching another person fall. It's refusing to let injustice change the person you've spent a lifetime becoming. Several months later, autumn arrived in Richmond with cool mornings and leaves drifting quietly across the sidewalks where everything had begun. The intersection outside the federal courthouse looked exactly as it had on that unforgettable day. People hurried to work with coffee in their hands. Cars paused at the traffic light. Life had moved forward, just as it always does. Yet for the people whose lives had crossed there, nothing would ever be quite the same again. The Federal Review concluded after a thorough investigation supported by body camera recordings, surveillance footage, witness interviews, and departmental records. The findings confirmed a pattern of professional misconduct that resulted in Officer Ryan Mercer's dismissal from the police department. More importantly, the department announced new training standards emphasizing constitutional policing, impartial decision-making, and respectful community engagement. The changes could not erase what had happened, but they represented a commitment to preventing similar failures in the future. Nathaniel Brooks never spoke publicly about himself. When local reporters requested interviews, he politely declined. The story isn't about me, he would say. It's about remembering that every person deserves to be treated with dignity before they're judged. His quiet response spread farther than any dramatic press conference ever could. Daniel Brooks returned to his federal responsibilities, carrying the same blue gift box home after their long-awaited reunion. The photograph and challenge coin found a permanent place on the bookshelf in his office. Whenever difficult investigations tested his patience, he would glance at them and remember his father's greatest lesson: authority earns respect only when it serves justice with humility. One afternoon, nearly 6 months after the incident, Nathaniel received an unexpected letter. The handwriting on the envelope looked unfamiliar. Inside was a short message. "Mr. Brooks, I don't expect forgiveness, and I know I cannot change what I did. But I wanted you to know that I have spent every day since our encounter confronting the assumptions that shaped my decisions. For the first time in many years, I have begun listening instead of judging. Thank you for showing more grace than I deserved. Ryan Mercer." Nathaniel folded the letter carefully and placed it inside an old family Bible. When Daniel later asked why he had kept it, Nathaniel smiled gently. Because people should be remembered not only for their worst mistake, but also for the courage to become better than it. On the following Sunday, Nathaniel returned to the same coffee shop across from the courthouse. He ordered the same cup of coffee, chose the same table by the window, and watched strangers pass by. A young police officer entered moments later. Before ordering, the officer noticed Nathaniel struggling slightly to carry his tray. Without hesitation, he walked over and offered to help. Nathaniel thanked him with a warm smile. It was a small gesture, almost invisible to everyone else in the room. But to Nathaniel, it was proof that kindness has a remarkable way of multiplying when someone chooses to practice it first. As sunlight poured through the cafe windows, he quietly reflected on the journey that had begun with suspicion, passed through accountability, and ended with hope. Some people believe power comes from a badge, a title, or a position. Nathaniel had learned something far greater. True authority is revealed in the moments when dignity refuses to surrender, truth refuses to hide, and compassion remains strong enough to outlive prejudice. Because in the end, the greatest victory is never proving someone else was wrong. It is proving that justice and character can still walk hand in hand.